They say the body keeps score. Every shift, every loss, every decision made in the space between a heartbeat and the absence of one, the body writes it all down, keeps it somewhere behind the sternum, in the place where breath comes from. Nora Callahan had been accumulating that kind of debt for 5 years, and tonight, at 3:17 in the morning, sitting alone in a booth at Lewis and Clark All-Night Diner on the wet south side of Portland, Oregon, she was trying to decide whether she was going to keep paying it. The coffee in front of her had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She hadn't noticed. She was staring at the condensation weeping down the window glass, watching the rain outside turn the streetlights into something impressionistic. Orange smears on black pavement, the whole city reduced to blur and reflection. Her scrubs were St. Augustine Medical Center blue. There was a rust-brown fleck of betadine on her collar that had been there since 11 the previous morning. She hadn't noticed that either. 29 years old, she felt 50. The shift had started clean. They always started clean. By hour 4, she was running on the controlled adrenaline that experienced ER nurses develop like a second circulatory system, a parallel bloodstream of focus and suppressed fear that keeps the hands steady and the voice calm and the face professional, while everything behind the eyes is a different story entirely. By hour 9, a 16-year-old boy had come through the bay doors on a gurney with a 9-millimeter round lodged 2 centimeters from his pulmonary artery, and Nora had helped pull him back from the edge 4 separate times over 3 hours. The 4th time, his heart had decided grudgingly to stay. She didn't know if he was still alive. She had clocked out at 2:47 and driven here because the alternative was going home to an apartment that would give her silence back in the exact shape of everything she was trying not to think about. Donna appeared at the edge of her peripheral vision. Donna was the kind of woman who had worked the same diner so long she had become structural, load-bearing, essential, as much a part of the room as the counter stools in the pie case. Her hair was the approximate color of autumn leaves left in a gutter a week too long, and her name tag had been crooked since the turn of the millennium and showed no signs of correcting itself. More coffee, hun. It wasn't a question. Keep it coming until I feel my hands again. Donna poured. The coffee smelled like burnt hazelnuts and institutional patience. It was not good coffee. Nora drank it like it was medicine because that was what it was. She opened her phone, started looking at apartment listings in quieter parts of town, smaller places, simpler leases. There was a clinic in Beaverton that had reached out twice about a position. Dermatology, Monday through Friday, no nights, no trauma bays, no 16-year-olds on gurneys. Nobody died in dermatology. You assessed, you treated, you went home to a life that didn't follow you into your sleep. She was 40 seconds into reading the Beaverton listing when the bell above the door rang. The man who walked in did not walk in the way most people walk into a diner at 3 in the morning. Most people, at that hour, arrive with their exhaustion showing. They come in with their shoulders rounded and their eyes already at half-mast, scanning for the nearest available booth the way a body seeks a horizontal surface at the end of a long day. They move through a space they assume to be safe because safety is the assumption that most people never have to examine. This man examined it. He filled the doorway first, stood in it for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to conduct a full inventory of the room, left to right, counter, kitchen window, back corridor, emergency exit. Nora. His eyes, when they crossed her, were dark and heavy-lidded and carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the hour. They registered her, assessed her, and moved on. Non-threat. Dismissed. The whole sequence took less time than a breath. He was 42, maybe. Hard to be precise, because whatever had been done to the body in the intervening years had layered itself over whatever the original age looked like. Broad through the shoulders, thick through the neck, the kind of frame that wasn't built in a gym but shaped by repetition, by the specific physics of a life spent carrying heavy things through difficult terrain. He wore a dark raincoat over a gray thermal shirt and dark jeans. No logos, no identifying marks visible. The coat came off in 3 efficient movements. unbutton, shrug, fold, once over the forearm. He walked with a compensation in his left leg. Not a limp. A limp is something you haven't learned to manage. This was managed. The gait of someone who had rebuilt themselves around an injury so many times that the injury had become architecture. He took table 6. Nora knew table 6 without looking at it. Furthest booth from the front door. Best sightline to every other table. Both exits visible simultaneously. In a room with 14 unoccupied booths, you had to know something specific to choose that one at 3 in the morning. Black coffee. His voice had the texture of gravel that had given up being surprised by weather. Leave the pot. Nora looked back at her phone. She told herself to stop. She told herself he was a dock worker, a long-haul trucker passing through. Someone's retired uncle, home from somewhere hard, not ready to sleep yet. She told herself this and did not believe a word of it. Because the occupational hazard of 5 years in emergency medicine is that the diagnostic reflex never clocks out. The body reads bodies the way other people read rooms, automatically, involuntarily, cataloging information that arrives faster than conscious thought can process it. And what Nora's body was reading, across the diner in the man at table 6, was a document she recognized. Hypervigilance, the scan, the seat selection. The way he had not touched his phone since placing it face down on the table, not the behavior of someone ignoring their phone, but the behavior of someone who had already memorized everything on it and didn't need the distraction between himself and the room. Chronic pain, left knee, the way he'd lowered himself into the booth, the slight pause, the controlled descent, spoke to a joint that had been rebuilt and was being managed with methodical attention. Controlled tremor, left hand. He was gripping the table edge, not bracing, managing. There was a difference, and Nora knew the difference, and his color, slightly off. The particular dysregulation of a system that had been running in crisis mode for so long it had forgotten what baseline felt like. She turned back to her phone. She thought about Beaverton, Monday through Friday. A life that did not require her to inventory strangers at 3 in the morning and feel the low hum of clinical concern she had not been asked to feel. 10 minutes passed. The diner breathed quietly around her. Earl worked the grill in the back, prepping for the 5 o'clock rush still hours away. Donna refilled the ketchup bottles. The rain ticked against the glass. Then Nora heard it. Not a loud sound. Never a loud sound in her experience. The real moments never are. Ceramic hitting laminate with too much force. The sound of a hand that had stopped cooperating. Thud. She looked up. The man at table 6 was rigid. His spine had arched backward, pressing hard against the vinyl of the booth. His hands were no longer managing anything. They were at his chest, fingers curled inward, knuckles white, the tendons in his forearms standing out in parallel ridges under the skin. His face, already pale when he walked in, had gone the color of old concrete. The blue was starting at the lips. Nora was out of her booth. She crossed the diner in the time it takes most people to process what they are looking at. Her brain did not deliberate. 5 years of emergency medicine had written a script into her nervous system that executed below the level of conscious thought. Assess, react, engage. "Sir," her voice projected across the room, flat and authoritative. He did not answer. He made a sound, a wet, strangled attempt at breath, the sound of a body trying to do something the body could no longer do. "Donna!" She didn't look away from him. "Call 911. Tell them male, approximately 40, witnessed cardiac event. Tell them we need ALS on that bus. Go." She heard the clatter of Donna moving. He slumped forward. His upper body hit the table. The sugar dispenser went to the floor and Nora grabbed him by the shoulders. 230 pounds of functional muscle going suddenly slack is a different physical problem than voluntary cooperation, and Nora felt it in her lower back as she hauled him off the booth and onto the linoleum. She got 2 fingers to his carotid artery. Nothing. The silence where a pulse should be. She tore his thermal shirt open. It split along the seam and folded back, and in the harsh diner light she saw a chest that was, even now, even in the urgency of the moment, a record. Burn scars, shrapnel marks, puckered and asymmetric, scattered across the upper left torso, a surgical scar along the lower right rib cage, old and professionally closed. And over his left pectoral, rendered in clean black ink, a tattoo she recognized immediately. The Navy SEAL trident, anchor, eagle, pistol, the trident itself. She noted it, filed it, did not have time for it. She interlocked her fingers, placed the heel of her right hand on his sternum, and began. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. She counted aloud, because counting aloud keeps the rhythm true and keeps the mind from the edges of the thing it is doing. Effective CPR on an adult male this size is not the composed, measured procedure that training videos suggest. It is exhausting, close quarters, necessary violence. Within 30 seconds, she heard the cartilage separate, a sound like a dry twig underfoot, as the xiphoid process gave under sustained pressure. She drove 2 inches deep into his chest on every compression. She did not flinch. She did not slow down. A trucker had wandered in from the rain and was standing in the doorway with his mouth open. "Get over here. Hold his head. Tilt his chin back. Open the airway. Do it now." The man dropped his bag and did exactly that. 3 minutes in, no pulse. Nora tilted the man's head, pinched his nose, sealed her mouth over his, breathed twice. His chest rose, airway clear. She smelled it on the exhale. Faint, the edge of a scent, almost masked by the coffee and the grill and the wet pavement smell that had come in with the trucker. But it was there, unmistakable to anyone who had studied it, even only academically, even only in a toxicology module in a training program years ago. Bitter almonds, not cardiac, not the chemical signature of myocardial infarction, something else entirely. Something that did not belong to the category of event she was currently treating. She filed it and went back to compressions. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. Then the man's body jerked. Not the weak, disoriented flutter of someone returning from cardiac arrest. His back lifted off the linoleum in a full arc. His eyes flew open, pupils blown wide and dark, fixed on a point above Nora's left shoulder. He was not seeing the diner ceiling. He was seeing something from a long time ago and a very different terrain. His right hand shot up and locked around her wrist. The grip was extraordinary. The grip of a body trained to hold on to things in conditions that demanded letting go, and that training did not leave even when everything else was failing. He pulled her face down toward his, 6 inches away. His breath hit her, that specific, wrong, almond-edged signature confirmed on second exposure. His eyes, for one single suspended second, focused. He was completely present. He knew exactly where he was and what was happening to him, and how much time he had, and exactly what he needed to say. Not heart. 2 syllables dragged up from the bottom of failing lungs. She held completely still. Protocol Omega Blue. Then the focus left his eyes like a light going out. His grip dropped. His hand hit the linoleum. Gone again. Nora stayed where she was for exactly 1 second. 1 stolen second, kneeling on a diner floor at 3:17 in the morning, staring at the face of a man with a Navy SEAL tattoo and the smell of bitter almonds on his breath, who had used the last 4 seconds of his consciousness not to ask for help, but to file a report. Protocol Omega Blue. She did not know what it meant. She did not know who he was. She went back to compressions, harder this time. Don't you quit in a diner. Sirens, finally. Red and white light washing the walls. The paramedics were Ray and Gus, both from St. Augustine's, both people Nora had worked beside on worse nights than this one. Ray dropped to his knees across from her. Nora, talk to me. She never broke rhythm. Male, approximately 42. Witnessed arrest, CPR in progress 6 minutes, no shocks. Regained consciousness for 4 seconds, agitated, oriented, then crashed. possible toxin exposure. She looked up at Ray directly. Bitter almond odor. Don't intubate without respiratory protection. Ray looked at her for exactly 1 second with the expression of a man deciding whether to question a thing or act on it. He acted on it. Gus, full precautions, staged. The defibrillator pads went on, the machine's voice flat and clinical. Shock advised. Clear. The body on the floor seized as the current moved through it. Nora's fingers hard against his carotid. She waited, then, there. A beat. Thready, erratic. Fragile as something just decided. But there. I have a pulse. Ray was moving. Load and go. St. Augustine's. Possible tox event. He looked at Nora. You coming? Nora looked at the man's face. The scars. The tattoo. The specific, deliberate clarity in his eyes in the 4 seconds he'd had to spend. A man like that did not use his last 4 seconds of consciousness on accident. He chose those words the way a soldier chooses a position, because it was the only ground available and it needed to be held. Yeah, she said, I'm riding with you. She did not know, climbing into the back of that ambulance, that the life she had been reading real estate listings to escape had just closed behind her like a door. The new one had already begun. In the ambulance, moving at 80 miles an hour through the slick streets of Portland, Nora sat on the bench seat with her hands wrapped around each other and her eyes on the monitor showing a rhythm that was ugly and marginal and hanging on by something not quite stubbornness, but the closest biological equivalent to it. She glanced at the patient property bag on the bench beside her. His phone, cracked screen, was visible through the clear plastic. It lit up, an app with no icon, just a gray square, a notification from a system she had never encountered that had no business being on a civilian's phone. Proximity alert, Hunter. 2. Approaching street, Augustine's. Nora read it once, read it again, set it down. She said nothing. She turned back to the monitor. She kept watching the rhythm that was keeping him alive. But the fear had arrived. It was sitting in the back of the ambulance with them, quiet and patient, not going anywhere. It had found the right address, and it intended to stay. St. Augustine Medical Center at 4 in the morning had its own particular silence. Not the silence of emptiness, the ER was never empty, but the silence of a building running at reduced voltage. The overhead lights in the corridors stepped down to their night setting, casting everything in a quality of illumination that flattened shadows and made the walls look like they were made of the same material as the floors. The sounds were still there. Monitors, the distant percussion of a gurney wheel that needed oil, the low murmur of a television in the family waiting area that nobody was watching. But they came from further away than they should have, muffled by the specific acoustic property of an institution holding its breath between crises. Nora Callahan moved through it like she belonged there, because she did. She had changed into a fresh set of scrubs from her locker and clipped her ID badge to her collar in the 2 minutes she'd had while the trauma team took the man from the ambulance bay into Bay 1. Dr. Hargrove had told her to go home. He had said it the way he said most things, with the efficient finality of a man who ran his department like a well-maintained machine and had no patience for unscheduled variables. Nora had nodded. She had walked toward the exit. She had turned left at the vending alcove instead, moving there before the automatic doors had finished opening, 5 years of reading rooms having made the habit automatic. She stood in the shadow between a Pepsi machine and a bulletin board covered in laminated hand hygiene reminders, and watched the 2 men walk through the automatic doors. They came in at 4:08, 2 suits. Not the rumpled off-the-rack suits of men who wore them because their job required it. These were suits that had been made to fit specific bodies. The taller one had hair the color of steel wool, cropped close, and a face constructed entirely of planes and angles that had never had any softness to lose. The shorter one was broader through the chest, with the flat, attentive eyes of a man paid to watch exits. They moved through the waiting room with the implicit suggestion that anything in their path would have the good sense to move. They reached the triage desk. Emily was on, new to nights, still earnest in the way the ER eventually sanded away. She looked up, prepared to be helpful. The taller man produced a leather wallet. A badge caught the fluorescent light. Department of Homeland Security. His voice was smooth and unhurried, the voice of a man who had never needed to raise it. We're looking for a John Doe admitted approximately 20 minutes ago. Cardiac arrest presentation. I can't disclose patient information without... This is a matter of national security. He leaned slightly forward. Not aggressively. Just enough. The individual you admitted is a federal fugitive carrying a hazardous biological agent. We need to secure him immediately for the safety of everyone in this facility. Emily's eyes went wide. Her hands went to her keyboard. Nora watched the badge from the alcove. She had treated federal agents, real ones, twice in her 5 years at St. Augustine's. She knew what they looked like when they arrived in a hospital. They arrived with urgency and protocol, and the specific kind of controlled chaos that came from operating inside a system with rules. They called ahead. They had paperwork. They deferred to medical authority on clinical matters even when it cost them time. These men had none of that. They had certainty. The flat, absolute certainty of people who did not operate inside a system with rules. Emily typed, "He's on the second floor, CT transport, outside radiology bay 2. "Thank you." The wallet snapped shut. "You've been very helpful." They turned toward the treatment area corridor. Nora was already moving toward the stairs. She took 4 flights at a pace that would have been a run if she'd let it become one. She kept it just below that, controlled. The pace of a nurse with somewhere to be. Her lungs registered the complaint. She didn't respond to it. Second floor. The badge on her collar got her through the stairwell door. The corridor was dim, night-lit. The floor a long rectangle of low light stretching toward the radiology suite. She could see the transport gurney parked outside Bay 2, the portable monitor blinking its green rhythm above it. She could see Kevin leaning against the wall with his phone, the blue screen light illuminating the particular expression of someone who was technically on duty and practically somewhere else entirely. She went to him, voice low and level. "Kevin, we need to move him." Kevin looked up. "Nora, I thought you were off." "There are 2 men in this building." They showed the triage nurse a DHS badge and got his location. "They are not DHS." She watched him processing this. "I believe they intend to harm this patient. We have to move him away from this corridor right now." Kevin laughed, the short, uncomfortable laugh of someone encountering a statement their reality doesn't have a file for. "Okay, that's... Nora, Hargrove will have my..." The elevator at the end of the corridor sounded. One tone, clean and mechanical. The doors opened. The man with steel wool hair stepped out. His eyes moved across the corridor in the same efficient sweep he'd used in the waiting room, and found the gurney, found Kevin, found Nora. He stopped for exactly 1 second. Then he adjusted his cuffs and began walking toward them. Not running. He didn't run. Running implied doubt, and this man had none. Nora released the gurney brake with one hand. "Kevin, move." She put her weight into the handles and pushed, not toward Bay 2, not toward the CT scanner, but hard left, through the double doors of the MRI suite. Kevin's body made the decision before his mind did. He cleared the doorway and swiped his badge on the control room panel. Nora shoved the gurney through. The doors engaged behind them with a solid, pressurized click. The MRI technician on duty, a young woman whose name tag read Priya, stood up with the expression of someone whose night had just become significantly more complicated. "You can't bring that in here. We haven't done a metal check. The patient could have implants. Lock this door. I can't just..." "Lock it." The man outside hit the reinforced glass of the control room window. Not hard. He wasn't panicking. He stood at the glass and looked at Nora the way a person looks at a problem they have encountered before in a different form and are already calculating the solution to. Then he reached inside his jacket. 2 suppressed reports muffled to something that sounded almost polite. 2 spider-webbed craters appeared in the bulletproof glass, radiating from their centers like frozen impact. The glass held. It would hold for a while, not indefinitely. On the gurney, something changed. The portable monitor's rhythm shifted, a subtle reorganization of the waveform that Nora caught before she consciously registered why she was looking at it. Then his right hand found the side rail of the gurney and gripped it with a strength that shouldn't have been available to a man in his condition. The sedation was clearing. His body was metabolizing it faster than the dosage anticipated. She could see it in the way his jaw set, the deliberate, muscular resolution of a man fighting his way back through pharmacological fog because the fog was not acceptable given what was happening around him. He reached up and wrapped his hand around the intubation tube. "Don't!" Nora moved toward him. He pulled. The sound was wet and wrong, and he convulsed through it, his body protesting what his will was insisting on. He coughed until his face went dark red. Then his breathing settled into something rough and self-sustaining, and his eyes opened and he looked at her. Not through her, at her, with the same devastating, specific clarity he'd had on the diner floor for 4 seconds. "The diner," he said. His voice was raw and stripped down to its base material. "Yes. You came with me. I heard what you said." He looked at the cracked glass, at the man standing behind it, patient and certain. Something moved across his face, not fear, nothing like fear, but the particular recognition of a man confirming a thing he had already calculated. "His name is Victor Strand," he said. Nora went still. "He was my CIA handler. I worked under him for 6 years. In 2013, he sold the operational position of my SEAL team to an arms dealer in exchange for financial considerations." A pause, one shallow cough. 8 men, all of them had people at home. He built Vanguard Global with the money he made from that, and has been running state-sponsored assassinations ever since. I have 11 years of his operational ledger on an encrypted drive. That is why I am on this gurney. He held out his hand for her phone. She gave it to him without deliberating about it. He dialed from muscle memory, no hesitation, no searching. He identified himself in a cadence that was military shorthand compressed into something nearly unrecognizable as language. "Sierra Echo Alpha Ghost, Code Black, binary agent confirmed. Organophosphate and mercury compound. Location St. Augustine's Medical, Portland. My cover is gone. Strand has eyes on this building. I have a civilian with me." He listened for a moment. His jaw tightened. "Don't talk to me about protocol. Get the bird in the air. I have 40 minutes before my kidneys cross the line." He handed the phone back. "My name is Declan Reardon," he said, "and I owe you an honest assessment of this situation." His eyes moved to the cracked glass where the operative had now produced something from his jacket that was neither a phone nor a badge. 90 seconds before that glass gives. Second man in this building, possibly a third. They will not stop. I know. You should not have gotten on that ambulance. That's not useful information right now. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. The architectural suggestion of one. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He looked at the portable oxygen tank strapped to the back of the gurney, then through the interior window at the MRI bore, the massive white cylinder of the scanner humming at its operational frequency on the other side of the glass. Then back at Nora. "Is that magnet active?" Priya from the floor where she had sensibly positioned herself. "It's always on. We don't power down between—" "Good." He unstrapped the tank. "Both of you. Behind the concrete housing. Now." Nora pulled Kevin behind the heavy shielded wall of the console. She heard the interior door to the scanner room open. She heard the grunt of a man throwing something heavy with what remained of his strength. The operative outside heard the impact and made the mistake of stepping through the doorway into the scanner room to see what had happened. The moment his weapon crossed the threshold of the magnetic field, 5 Tesla at close range does not negotiate. The firearm was ripped from his hand and accelerated into the bore with a sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. The operative stood there, empty-handed, for the half-second it took him to understand what had just happened. Declan did not give him a second half-second. One short, precise, economical elbow strike. The operative went down. "Stairs," Declan said. "Roof." She took most of his weight up 4 flights and did not comment on it. Any acknowledgement of the weight would have produced in him a response she didn't have time for. So she shouldered under his left arm, and she climbed and he climbed, and neither of them said anything about the sound his breathing had developed or the temperature coming off his skin, which was the temperature of a body in active systemic crisis. The roof door accepted Kevin's badge. Cold air hit them, the specific cold of a Pacific Northwest November at altitude, wet and absolute. The Portland skyline spread in every direction, the city's orange ambient glow reflecting off the cloud cover, the rain still falling in the thin, persistent way that suggested it had always been falling and had no plans to stop. The roof was empty. HVAC units, ventilation stacks, gravel and standing water. No helicopter. Declan went down against the nearest air conditioning unit, controlled, deliberate, and pressed one hand flat against his sternum. His temperature, when Nora checked his pulse by touch, was transmitting through his skin like a warning. 148, racing and erratic. The mercury compound was advancing. Without filtration, his kidneys would cross a threshold in the next 30 minutes that no amount of field medicine could walk back from. Then she felt it before she heard it. A vibration in the gravel beneath her knees, rising through the concrete. A frequency too low to be mechanical, but too regular to be anything but intentional. Declan's head came up. His eyes went to the eastern edge of the roof. The Black Hawk rose from below the parapet with no lights and no announcement, just the rotor signature and the wall of downwash that turned the rain sideways and pressed Nora's scrubs flat against her body. The minigun in the door fired suppression, flashbang munitions detonating in a sequence of white concussions across the gravel, each one a physical event that sent the 4 Vanguard operators who had come through the rooftop door diving behind the concrete housing of the elevator shaft. A cable dropped from the helicopter's belly, steel braid, thick as a wrist, with a horse collar harness at the end. Declan took the harness and pushed it at her. "You first. You can't hold a cable for 40 feet. She said it the way she said clinical things, not as an argument, as a fact. "Your grip strength is compromised. The mercury has been working on your motor nerves for 3 hours. If you lose your hold at 20 feet, nothing I did tonight matters." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she would recognize later as the specific look of someone receiving information they had already calculated but were hoping was wrong. Then he unclipped a carabiner from his belt and attached it to the harness ring. 1 harness, 1 carabiner, 2 people. As they rose off the roof, the cable retracting, the gravel falling away, the city of Portland expanding in every direction, she felt him press something into her hand, small, waterproof. She closed her fingers around it without looking down. "It isn't only Vanguard's client list," he said. The wind was enormous. She read his voice from 6 inches away. "What else?" "Senator Dale Harmon, 6 months ago, ruled a cardiac event. He had 2 colleagues on the Senate Appropriations Committee who voted against Vanguard's federal contracts in the prior session." A pause as Portland shrank below them. "Both colleagues died within 90 days. Same compound, same cardiac signature. No one screened for binary agents because no one had reason to know the compound existed." She looked at the flash drive in her hand. "How many senators?" 5 confirmed. The drug is designed to be undetectable. It mimics natural cardiac death at the cellular level. No trace unless you know what you're looking for, and you know to look. "Except for the smell," she said quietly. "At metabolization temperature, it produces a volatile compound. Faint, easily missed." He looked at her directly. "You are the first person in 11 years who caught it in the field without prior knowledge." Portland continued to shrink below them. She closed her fingers tighter around the drive. The Black Hawk set down in a clearing in the Mount Hood National Forest, 37 minutes northwest of Portland. The cabin in the center of the clearing was built to be invisible from the air. Concrete foundation, heavy timber walls, steel shutters over every window, a generator running somewhere underground. Tanner Briggs met them at the door. He assessed Declan in one look and assigned the situation a priority level without asking questions that didn't help. Nora went directly to the locked cabinet in the corner. Medical supplies were always in the corner cabinet, always locked, always either better or worse than you hoped. This one was worse than she hoped and better than nothing. Field surgery kit, antibiotics, atropine auto-injectors, and behind everything else, pushed to the back, dusty and silent, a portable dialysis unit. The casing was filmed with 2 years of disuse. The tubing looked brittle. The filter cartridge housing had a wobble in its seating that she resolved by sliding the flash drive underneath it as a shim because what was available was what was available. Declan, watching from the cot, produced a sound that was almost a laugh. 11 years of state-sponsored murder propping up a filter cartridge. I know, Nora said. Do you want your blood filtered or not? She inserted the femoral catheter by touch and experience and the specific quality of focus that arrives when there is no alternative to focus. The machine hummed to life. His blood moved through the circuit, out dark and laden, back cleaner. Full filtration takes 4 hours, Nora said, watching the flow indicator. But his kidneys only need 2 cycles to get ahead of the mercury load. 2 hours buys us the window we need. We don't have 2 hours, Briggs said from the window, his eyes on the tree line. Vanguard has satellite positioning. They'll triangulate the extraction route within 90 minutes. Then we do what we can in 90 minutes, Nora said. Start counting. Briggs held the light. Nora monitored the flow rate and watched the color of the returning blood and watched Declan's face and watched Owen Slade's hands. She had been watching Owen Slade's hands for 11 minutes before she was certain. The watch checking she had initially read as tactical monitoring, a man keeping time against an external threat. But the intervals were too precise. Not surveillance intervals, countdown intervals. And twice now, his right hand had drifted to the dialysis tubing and made a small adjustment, the movement of someone being helpful, but the result of someone buying time. The flow rate had dropped to 60% of operational, not enough to fail, enough to slow. She did not look at Owen Slade when she reached out and adjusted the tubing back to correct flow. She made it look like a routine check. She looked at Declan. Declan looked back at her. His eyes moved once, briefly, to Owen Slade. Then back to her. A microscopic nod. He had known for longer than she had. The flashbang came through the window at the moment she had finished thinking, so we're doing this now. The concussion was physical, a pressure wave she felt in her chest, and the white light turned the cabin interior into a photograph of itself. The door came off its hinges. Men in tactical black moved through the frame with the coordinated efficiency of people who had done this kind of work before and found it unremarkable. Declan moved from the cot the moment Owen Slade moved toward the gun rack. He should not have been able to move that fast. Nothing about his physiology in the last 4 hours supported that speed. But the hands that pinned Owen Slade's gun hand to the wall before it cleared the lock were the hands of someone who had decided that physics was a suggestion when the alternative was unacceptable. Briggs took a round through the left shoulder and kept firing. Nora saw the dialysis machine power cord on the floor, 220 volts. The plug exposed where she had pulled it loose to reposition the unit. She saw the operative moving along the left wall. She saw the gap between his tactical boot and his shin guard. She did not deliberate. The current took him instantly. Every voluntary muscle contracted simultaneously, and he went sideways, and the side of his head found the oak table edge, and he did not get up. Declan's pistol locked back empty. Briggs was down. 3 men filled the doorway. Declan reached for the radio with the hand that still worked. His voice, when he keyed the mic, was as level as if he were placing an order. Sierra Echo Alpha Ghost calling Mockingbird. Omega file confirmed. Location, Blackwood. We need you now. Static. Then a voice. Copy that, Ghost. Don't die before we get there. Declan looked at her across the wreckage of the cabin. 5 minutes, he said. Nora pressed her back against the overturned table, the Glock heavy and unfamiliar in hands that had never been designed to hold one, and looked at the doorway where 3 men were already moving again. 5 minutes is a long time. She had worked with worse odds. She raised the weapon and held the line. 5 minutes is a subjective unit of time. In an emergency room, 5 minutes is a chest tube and 2 liters of blood, and a decision made before the surgeon arrives. Nora Callahan had spent 5 years understanding exactly what 5 minutes cost and what it bought. She had never once confused it for a short period of time. Behind the overturned table, with the cabin filling with smoke and the Glock held in both hands, she understood it now in a new register entirely. 3 men in the doorway, moving with the flat efficiency of people who had been paid to be thorough. No hesitation, no communication. They had distributed the room among themselves without discussion, each man already oriented to his sector, already calculating the geometry of what came next. Declan was at her left, pistol empty, slide locked back. His left arm pressed against his ribs in a way that said the mercury had found his nerve pathways. His color had not improved. His eyes had not changed. Reading the room without sentiment, looking for the ground worth holding. Briggs was in the corner. A round through his shoulder had put him on the floor, and the floor was where he remained, one hand pressed against the wound, the other still wrapped around his rifle. Owen Slade was against the far wall in the zip restraints Declan had put on him before the breach, watching everything with the expression of a man whose calculation had resolved in a direction he hadn't fully accounted for. The 3 men advanced. Nora fired twice. Not at targets, at the geometry of their movement. She was not a marksman. But she had spent 5 years reading bodies, understanding the way they responded to unexpected stimuli. You did not need to hit something to change its behavior. You needed to make the calculation more expensive than anticipated. She bought 11 seconds, maybe 12. Declan said very quietly, "There." She felt it before she heard it. A frequency rising through the concrete floor. The specific acoustic signature of a military airframe running hard and low over forested terrain. Building from subsonic into something the whole body registered. The 3 men heard it too. The tall one looked up, just for a moment, just long enough. The first shaped charge took out the rear window. The second detonated on the porch with a concussion that reset the pressure in the room. The acoustic device that came through the gap in the wall hit the inner ear like a physical object and reduced everything behind it to white noise and vertigo. 3 precise shots from the tree line. The doorway cleared. The men who came through afterward wore gray camo with no unit patches and moved with the coordinated silence of a team that had stopped needing language for the operational parts. They secured the perimeter in under 90 seconds. Behind them, moving without urgency through the cleared doorframe, was a man in a trench coat carrying a satellite phone. 55, maybe. Silver at the temples. A face that had been lived in rather than just occupied, lined in ways that suggested decisions made under real pressure, with real consequences attached. He stepped over the threshold and looked at Declan first, then at Nora, still holding the Glock, not quite ready to lower it. "You can put that down," he said. His voice was calibrated to the specific frequency of calm that expanded in inverse proportion to surrounding urgency. "It's over, Ms. Callahan." Nora lowered the weapon. Her hands, she noticed distantly, had stopped shaking. She wasn't sure exactly when. "Barrett Aldrich, I'm with the Tribune." Declan, from the floor where he had finally allowed himself to sit. "He's also with the Department of Justice. The Tribune part is real, the rest is complicated." "Everything about tonight is complicated," Nora said. The medical team Aldrich brought were properly equipped, carrying gear that had not been sitting in a cabinet for 2 years, with an actual antidote protocol for binary compound exposure. Nora gave them the handover the way she gave every handover: concise, sequenced, clinically precise. Time of exposure, compounds identified, dialysis initiated, estimated filtration achieved before the breach. The lead medic listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once, the nod of one professional acknowledging another, and went to work. She stepped back. For the first time since 3:17 in the morning, there was nothing immediately requiring her hands. Aldrich appeared beside her with coffee from a thermos one of his people had produced. He handed her a cup without asking. She drank it, hot and real in a way that the last several hours had not consistently been. "Victor Strand is in federal custody," Aldrich said. "His command position was triangulated from the extraction call 31 minutes ago." Nora looked at him. Declan knew the call would do that. He built the extraction protocol himself. He knew what moving those assets would require. A pause. The cabin served two purposes tonight. One of them was getting him out alive, Nora said. The other was making Strand commit visible resources so you could find him. Yes. He didn't tell me. No. He let me believe we were running. You were running. The other part was additional. Aldrich looked at her evenly. He made a judgment call about operational security. It was not a judgment call about whether you were capable of handling the information. "The distinction is noted," Nora said. "I don't find it entirely satisfying." "No," Aldrich agreed. "It isn't." From the cot, Declan said, "The drive." Nora walked to the dialysis machine and extracted the flash drive from beneath the filter cartridge. She held it up. "Still here?" she said. "There's something I didn't tell you on the roof. I'm aware there are several things you didn't tell me on the roof. This one matters differently." He looked at Aldrich, then back at her. "The drive contains the decryption key for a dead man's switch. Strand built it into his operational security 4 years ago, an encrypted file that transmits automatically to 5 foreign intelligence services if he doesn't enter a code every 24 hours. The file contains the identities and current positions of every United States covert operative that Vanguard identified over 11 years of operation." The room was very quiet. "How many operatives?" Nora said. 214 confirmed, possibly more." "When does the switch trigger?" Aldrich checked his watch. "Strand entered his last code at 0600 yesterday morning, 24-hour cycle, which means 19 hours from now, unless the decryption key on that drive is used to disarm it." "He built his own failsafe," Nora said. "He built it as leverage if he was ever taken alive. He didn't anticipate the drive being out of his possession when that happened." Nora looked at the drive in her hand. The small, waterproof, unremarkable object that had been in her pocket through a hospital corridor and a rooftop and a Blackhawk and a forest firefight. That had spent 90 minutes as a shim for an aging dialysis machine in a burning cabin in the Cascades. She handed it to Aldrich. "Make it count," she said. Briggs was medevaced at first light. Alive, stable, the shoulder wound serious, and entirely survivable. He shook Nora's hand before they loaded him, a firm, deliberate grip that communicated things that didn't require words. Owen Slade was walked out in custody. He said nothing. He looked at Declan once, and Declan looked back, and whatever passed between them in that moment was old and resolved and did not require witnesses. Nora sat on the cabin steps in the cold as the forest came back to itself around her. The rain had stopped. The Douglas firs dripped their stored water in irregular rhythms. The clearing smelled of pine and wet earth and the fading chemical edge of the flashbang residue. She thought about the 16-year-old from her shift, the one they had pulled back 4 times. She did not know if he had made it through the night. She realized, sitting on those steps after everything the previous hours had contained, that she wanted to know, not as a clinical matter, not as a shift metric. She wanted to know the way you wanted to know about something that mattered. The wanting was information. It told her she was not done, that she had never been looking for an exit. She had been looking for a reason to stay. The reason had arrived in the form of a man who smelled wrong on a diner floor, and 2 words that changed the direction of everything after them. Aldrich sat beside her. More coffee. She accepted it. "Your name will not appear in any public record unless you want it to," he said. "I don't want it to." There will be debriefs, task force interviews, weeks of it. After the process, he continued, there are options if you wanted them. 6 months later, Washington, D.C., the second week of April. Nora sat on a bench outside the Russell Senate office building and read the Washington Post. The headline, Vanguard. Global dissolved, Strand sentenced to life. Senate votes sweeping intelligence oversight reform. She had read it 3 times. She read it a 4th. Some things were true in a way that bore repeating. She heard him before she saw him. Declan crossed the plaza in the April light. The gray pallor was gone. He carried himself with the solidity of someone who had rebuilt from specific damage and arrived at something sturdier than before. He sat beside her and set a small box on the bench between them. She opened it. A badge, white and blue and gold, the World Health Organization crest. Crisis Response Division, Field Nursing, Conflict Zone Unit. They need someone specific, Declan said. Someone who reads a room the way other people read weather, not because they were trained to, but because the thing they are is the training. Nora turned the badge over in her hands. She thought about her father, a quiet man who had believed, without ever declaring it, that the skills you developed in the service of other people were not yours to retire simply because the difficulty level increased. He had lived that way his entire adult life and raised her to understand it without explaining it directly. Some lessons arrived through the air of a household rather than through instruction. This one had. She had not known it was a lesson until tonight, until a concrete step in the Cascades at dawn, and now again here, on a bench in the April sun. She thought about a 16-year-old boy with a 9mm round near his pulmonary artery. She had called the hospital from the debrief facility and learned he had made it, was enrolled in a GED program intended to persist. She had not expected that to matter to her as much as it did. She clipped the badge to her jacket. "One condition," she said. He looked at her steadily. "You never withhold operational information from me again. I am not a variable you manage. I am the person responsible for keeping you functional, and that requires full situational awareness. Always." Declan considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Agreed," he said. They stood. The April morning spread out around them, the city maintaining its idea of itself, the Potomac carrying its cold water somewhere useful. "Sudan posting starts in 3 weeks," he said. "I know. I read the brief. The coffee situation there is—" "I read that part too." She picked up her cup, finished it. "You said you knew a place in Zurich." "I do." "Then we have a layover to plan." They walked down the steps together into the morning. Not a love story, something tested at a more fundamental level than that, and held. 2 people who had found, in the specific chaos of a November night in Portland, the one partner who operated at their frequency. Behind them, on the bench, the Post sat open to the headline she had read 4 times. Nora Callahan did not find her way out of the emergency room. She found her way into a larger one, the kind without walls.